We'll move on now to the relationship between the President and the Supreme Court. Alongside Congress and the Presidency, the judiciary is the third branch of government and part of the system of checks and balances. The 9 justices of the Supreme Court are appointed for life. They are nominated by the President, but the appointment is subject to the approval of the Senate. So the nomination of a justice is a very critical presidential decision with enormous political impact. President Nixon's appointments were very controversial.
President Nixon had ample opportunities to exercise his constitutional authority to reshape the Supreme Court. He made 4 appointments approved by the Senate, that of the Chief Justice, Warren Burger, and Associate Justices Harry Blackmun, Lewis Powell, William Rehnquist. However, the Senate rejected 2, Clement Haynsworth and G. Harold Carswell. Mr. President, let's turn to the Supreme Court. You've named 4 justices. You had 2 turned down. What's happened there? Has it gone too far in partisan politics?
Well, incidentally, it's not new. I had 2 titanic debates, as you know, with the Senate over 2 of my appointments. Clement Haynsworth, who recently died, would have made a great justice. He lost because of a phony ethical charge that some of those who made it later agreed was phony. But the reason he lost was because he was conservative, an honest conservative. Not a racist, but just a conservative. And that was a loss. If the President sends to the Senate for confirmation a judge who is qualified and approved by his peers, the American Bar Association, for example, then I think the Senate should confirm that individual. And not put up these arguments that they're against him for reasons that really aren't the real ones. The real ones being that they are looking at his views rather than his qualification.
President Reagan also made some controversial appointments to the Supreme Court.
The constitutional power to fill vacant seats on the Supreme Court gives the President long-standing influence on our system of government. President Reagan appointed William Rehnquist as Chief Justice and 3 others as Associate Justices, including Sandra Day O'Connor, the first woman ever.
I'd made up my mind before I got there that I was going to appoint the first woman.
Was that right?
Yes.
And you managed to find her. Wasn't
Yes.
that hard at all? Huh?
And she's a darn good justice.
What'd you want? What was your objective in the court, though? Surely you had a strategy.
What I wanted were judges in the Supreme Court who interpreted the law, who did not write new laws. And this is quite important. Many times I thought that the court was really kind of making political decisions. And I wanted a court that would be bound by the Constitution in interpreting it. And I think we've been successful in that.
Why appoint a woman? Why did you make up your mind before? Was it the temperament of a woman? Was it just a different texture that perhaps comes from a woman's reasoning? What?
Well, I thought with the whole change today of women as a part of society and being elected to elective offices and so forth as well, I thought that they were serving as judges. They had a right to be considered.
Now, you had one other episode on the court, Mr. Bork, Robert Bork, who was turned down. Did you feel that your power to appoint a justice was usurped by the Congress? Did they go beyond their, what you would judge the constitutional right to advise and consent?
They very much did go beyond that. You can ask almost any judge that knows, and he will tell you that Bork was probably one of the best qualified men to be on the Supreme Court of any justices in America. And it was pure politics that kept him from that position.
Bob, it's clear, isn't it, that presidents are far more conscious about the court and about appointments to the Supreme Court now, aren't they?
Yes, they are, and for very good reason. Over the last 20, 30 years, the Supreme Court has become a highly politicized institution. It is, of course, a court of law, but it does have a political role to play. And increasingly since the 1950s, it's been playing a significant role in American politics. What that means is that no president can afford to ignore the political role of the Supreme Court, and therefore he must try to use his power to appoint Supreme Court justices to extend his political influence with the court.
So presidents, and I think I'm right about this, are very, very conscious of who they appoint, and the appointment process is lengthened, and the amount of advice they take, and because they are aware of the political impact of their appointee.
Oh, absolutely. They now very carefully research the backgrounds of anybody who might be a potential nominee to the court. Very often, having arrived at a shortlist, they are then brought to the White House and they are asked a variety of questions. It was even said in the 1980s that President Reagan actually had a litmus test for Supreme Court justices, and that was it. They had to be against abortion as a constitutional right. This is because President Reagan, and indeed the Republican Party in general, opposed a decision which the Supreme Court had taken in 1973, granting a woman a constitutional right to choose to have an abortion. So here was a major political issue. The president wanted to try and control policy on the abortion issue, and therefore his best means of doing it was through the court and through his ability to ensure that new members of the court shared his views on the abortion issue.
It's very noticeable that, given his opposition to abortion, President Reagan nevertheless appointed the first woman to the court. Do you think that was an indication that he was aware that he had to do something to compensate for his opposition to abortion?
Yes, as we just saw, he nominated successfully Sandra Day O'Connor to the court in 1981. Well, the O'Connor appointment was definitely an attempt by the Reagan administration to prove that he wasn't against women or hostile to women's issues. And he had suffered something of a gender gap in the 1980 election, and by that I mean that men were much more favorable towards women than were women, and therefore he probably thought that if he put a woman on the court, this would convince women that he in fact was on their side and sympathetic to their cause.
Presidents frequently do this kind of thing, don't they? They appoint somebody who's Jewish to the court or somebody who's black to the court, so it's in a long tradition.
Absolutely. It's the latest, as you say, in a long tradition of trying to have the cross-section of the nation represented on the Supreme Court. So they used to pick nominees on the basis of what state or region they came from, and then on religion or race, and now gender.
I'm reminded of a story of former President Harry Truman, who was referring to one of his Supreme Court appointees, a man called Tom Clark, and he referred to him in his memoirs as that damn fool from Texas. And I mention it only because presidents are frequently disappointed with their appointees, are they not?
Yes, they are indeed. And that's because once a Supreme Court justice is appointed, then he or she, in the case of O'Connor, is now free from all control by the president. Supreme Court justice is appointed for life and is no longer accountable to anyone, including the president. That means they can carve out their own path, free of pressure from the White House. And for example, President Nixon, who talked about his appointments, put a man on the court called Harry Blackmun, who he thought would be a good conservative. And in fact, Blackmun turned out to be one of the more liberal members on the court over the last 20 years.
Yes. Thank you, Bob. The third and last set of presidential relationships we're going to look at concerns the federal bureaucracy. Most presidents have a fairly jaundiced view of the huge executive branch of American government, and Richard Nixon was no exception.
Outnumbering by far his political appointees were the career government employees, and Mr. Nixon, like other presidents, faced what seemed to be an immovable object, the vast entrenched bureaucracy.
It's one of the most difficult responsibilities a president or a cabinet officer or a government official has, because too many bureaucrats think that they should make the decisions, and too many of them get too big for their britches. In order to get the best out of them, it is very important that you consult with them, but you must also keep them in line. And they must understand that after they have given their best advice and the decision is made, then all debate stops. That's true of a cabinet officer, it's true of a bureaucrat, it's true of anybody else, and that they should support it or resign.
What about leaks?
One time I remember we had a document that I considered to be so secret that in the White House we only made one copy. I read it, the Vice President read it, the National Security Advisor read it, my Chief of Staff read it, and that was it. We all put our initials on the same document. And then the document went to the Defense Department because it involved defense matter. And I later found out they made 110 Xerox copies and distributed all through the top and secondary level to the Defense Department. You know, these kind of things can be very costly.
But how do presidents go about creating the organization to run their administration? Vice President Gerald Ford became president, you'll remember, after Nixon resigned in midterm over Watergate.
Many Americans picture their president alone in the Oval Office, burdened by the awesome concerns of the nation and the world, agonizing over a major decision. But the lonely decision is reached with the assistance of a crowd of advisors, a group President Ford inherited from President Nixon.
The first cabinet meeting, I asked everybody to stay on temporarily. I thought we had to have some continuity. And one of the first that demanded attention and probably change, Al Haig was the Chief of Staff for President Nixon. Al wanted to leave. He was worn out. He had gone through Watergate, and he was just at wit's end, really, with all the pressures he had gone through. And I felt I needed my own Chief of Staff. So I quickly drafted Don Rumsfeld, who was our representative at NATO, brought him back, and after about a month, he took over from Al Haig. Then we gradually made other changes, but I didn't feel that it was wise just to throw them all out. We had to have continuity, and on a one-after-one basis, we made changes. I didn't want any people in my cabinet who were just yes people. I wanted them to be knowledgeable, people of integrity, people who would speak up with their own views, whether they agreed with mine or agreed with their other cabinet members. And that's what I finally put together. I gradually made other changes so that I had people that I had trust in who not only were knowledgeable but articulate and would speak up when they had a viewpoint.
Mr. President, what were your measures of men, women to bring into the government, cabinet level, agency heads and that? What did you look for?
Well, I looked first for intelligence, brains. I looked also for what I call heart, and I looked also for guts. Let me explain that. In an organization, you need people who have brains, heart, and guts. And perhaps the most important is the last. Now, let me explain what I mean. If you have somebody that's just intelligent, that isn't enough. That he's going to approach, he or she, problems too coldly. Cold intelligence is not what I want to find. I want somebody who has heart, too, who, in addition to being very intelligent, has a feeling for people, knows how to treat people and treats them well. And by guts, I mean you have to have somebody who, when the going gets really rough, that he or she will not jump ship. They will stand with the man. Whether it's, particularly when he has to, he, the president, or she, whoever it happens to be, has to take a position which is unpopular. It is so easy these days and so tempting. When the polls show that a particular measure is unpopular, for people to desert or to, in effect, as I say, jump ship. And whoever is in the presidency, for example, he's got to have around him not a group of people that are just loyal and always say what he wants to say. I want them to tell him what he needs to hear as well as what he wants to hear. But he must have people who will recognize that it is a very difficult position, and while he wants their best judgment, he also deserves their support if the going gets rough and if he has to overrule what they may happen to advise.
Should a vice president have more to do, Mr. President?
Well, you can't write a prescription for a vice president. I picked, in my judgment, a first-class one in Nelson Rockefeller. I gave him duties. I turned over to him a major responsibility for domestic programs. Every president makes his own choice. There are only a very limited number of duties a vice president has under the Constitution. One, to preside over the Senate, and number two, to succeed the president.
Gerald Ford was himself one of the few vice presidents to become president in midterm. It was the awareness of the reality of that possibility that led President Carter to place the same emphasis as Ford on the importance of the vice presidency.
Vice presidents are constitutionally mandated to preside over the Senate without holding the powers of senators. They represent the president at ceremonies and chair various fact-finding committees. However, Mr. Carter said he intended to have his vice president, Walter Mondale, play a larger role in government to prepare him to step into the office of the presidency. You made Mr. Mondale a prominent figure. You brought him into the internal workings of the White House, I guess, more than any other president.
I did. Well, when I decided to ask Fritz Mondale to be the vice president, it was with the understanding that he would be treated with respect and with dignity and with responsibilities. I gave him an office inside the White House. He was never once excluded from a meeting of the utmost importance in which I was involved. I gave him substantive things to do. I didn't make him just a figurehead of a blue ribbon commission. And
should we change the law? Should there be statutory authority?
No, I think that's a decision for each president to make. You know, some presidents just let the vice president be his representative to attend foreign leaders' funerals and to head so-called drug enforcement, blue ribbon commissions, and so forth. I really thought that I needed Fritz Mondale to be a partner with me, and that partnership was beautiful. I always felt at ease about my vice president taking over if something happened to me. Also, an interesting thing was that when I went into office, when I was elected, before I was inaugurated, I discovered that the vice president had not ever been included in the process for handling nuclear weapons, which is was a startling discovery. None of the previous vice presidents were. I couldn't believe it was true, but Vice President Mondale was placed in the succession just behind me. He had all of the information about the so-called strategic response to a prospective strike. So in every possible way, Mondale, my vice president, was treated in such a way that if anything happened to me, he could immediately know about and understand what was happening.
Bob, the role of the vice presidency clearly concerns some of the presidents, but the thing that struck me most was about their views on the bureaucracy, and it reminds me of a story that Franklin Roosevelt used to tell when he was Secretary of the Navy. I think this was in the administration of Woodrow Wilson, and he said it was like punching. He was referring to the bureaucrats in the department. He said it was like punching a feather mattress. You punched and punched and punched the mattress, but nothing ever changed. It stayed the same shape. And it just occurs to me that perhaps, Roosevelt's remarks about the Navy Department in a way is a microcosm about the whole operation of the presidency in the domestic arena. All the presidents appear to find it very difficult to govern and make policy and get their legislation passed on domestic issues. What do you think?
Yes, I think that's generally true. There have actually been very few presidents that we could call successful, I think, in recent decades in the United States. And it does appear that it's becoming increasingly difficult for a president to do what he was elected to do. Now, this is, as you say, particularly true, I think, in domestic issues. In fact, academics developed a theory which they called the two presidencies. And what they said was that there was one president, but two presidencies, one for domestic affairs and one for foreign affairs. And statistical analysis indeed showed that a president is far less likely to get his policies adopted in the domestic arena than in foreign affairs. Now, I think there are good reasons for this. The most obvious one being that the American public, the American electorate, cares most about domestic issues: jobs, the economy, housing, and education. Because they care, Congress cares. So Congress is much more interventionist on those domestic issues that will, in the end, perhaps, decide whether they themselves get sent back to Washington or replaced at the next election. So certainly in the domestic arena, where the public is knowledgeable and more interested, the president faces a number of other political institutions and actors who have some important things to say on the issues of the day.
But you feel that this doesn't apply in the arena of foreign affairs, and I take it by implication the suggestion is that presidents have much more discretion in the foreign policy arena.
Absolutely, because foreign affairs in some ways is the other side of the coin from domestic affairs. The first thing to note is that the American public is not only largely ignorant of foreign affairs, it's not even interested in foreign affairs, except when some massive issue like Vietnam, of course, is hitting the headlines. But generally speaking, the American public is content to rally around the flag and follow the president. The second thing to say, however, is that unlike in regard to domestic issues, the Constitution of the United States gives the president specific powers and roles in foreign policy. For example, the president is commander-in-chief of the armed forces. He negotiates treaties. He appoints and receives ambassadors. So these are very specific roles geared to the conduct of foreign policy. So for both of these reasons, constitutional and political, the president has a much stronger hand to play in foreign affairs than in domestic affairs.
Well, I'm pleased that you've noted this difference in the two presidencies, because in the next two programs, that's what we are going to primarily concern ourselves with, and that is the relationships that the president has in the arena of foreign affairs. Thank you very much. Indeed, next time we'll find out what Presidents Nixon and Ford have to say about the major international events of their presidencies, including the Cambodian invasion, the opening to China, the Mayaguez incident, and the fall of Saigon.